Hi, everyone. So yes, I'm Jaime Woo. Thank you so much for joining me for this session. Your system has recovered from an incident, but have your developers. We're going to start with an interactive element. So how many of you, after an incident, has gone through a process to make sure that your system has recovered? Put up your hand if you've gone through that. Yes, this is great. This is what I expected. Keep those hands up. Keep those hands up. Now, how many of you have gone through, after an incident, a process to make sure that your operators have recovered, that the people are just as healthy as your system? Oh, I see those hands going down. Well, except for a couple of you. That's awesome. That's the main premise of this talk. It's to ask what happens after an incident. And while we have a lot of protocols in place to help our systems become healthy again, are we doing the same for the people who are operating those systems? Are we supporting the people who tackled the incident with the same level of care that we do for the machinery? Now, I started to wonder, well, maybe there are some reasons why all of your hands went down. Maybe there's a good reason why we don't do this as a standard. Maybe it's because we think that this is part of the job, that we just assume that we all have very stressful jobs and that dealing with the stress of it is just part of the role. Maybe it's because it's not that bad. Maybe after you've had a stressful workday, you go home and you're able to cook a nice dinner or watch a movie and all that stress goes away. And I think we're pretty compassionate people. We care about the people who we work with. And that if it was that bad, we really do hope that they'd speak up, right? Or maybe it's because we focus on the systems that we understand. Humans are complicated, they're different, they react differently on different days. Sometimes it's easier to focus on the thing that seems a little bit more standard and reproducible. So today, for the next 15 minutes that I have, I ask you to be courageous and vulnerable. Let's do the thing that we don't normally do. Let's dive into what's messy. Let's look at the people side of things and see what we get coming out of it. So to start, I did a straw poll, and this is a caveat that straw polls are not scientific. These numbers do not mean that this is what's occurring across the industry. Please do not tweet this out there and be like, oh my God, everything's on fire. That's not what a straw poll does. This just gives us a launching point for a discussion. But I talked to 40 production engineers, and one of the questions I asked them was, after an incident, how stressed are you? Calm, a little stressed, stressed, very stressed. So remember that stress and very stressed are the highest ones. And over 4 in 10, nearly 43% of them said that they felt stressed or very stressed on average after an incident. So this is not just, I remember this one time. It's, when I'm faced with this, this is the state I'm in. Now, does that surprise anyone here in this room at all? Maybe that number's too low. I think maybe that's the thing that surprises you. And what is the effect of that? So afterwards, I asked, in the past month, which of the following have you noticed post-incident? And I'll read the different categories on the bottom in case you can't see it. I asked ability to fall asleep, ability to concentrate, mood, appetite, desire to be social, ability to enjoy things. Now, taken together, these are the things that are hallmarks of our lives, right? This is a representative of how we are in our day-to-day. And on the left side, you'll see from 0 to 30. That's not a percentage. That's the number of people who replied to that question. And blue means worse or less, red means no change, and orange means better or more. And as you can see, there's a lot of blue on here. Over 50% of people said that they had a worse ability to fall asleep. They couldn't sleep as well. Over 50% said it was harder to concentrate. 60% said they had a worse mood. Appetite's the outlier, and actually I'm pretty happy. Clearly, after an incident, y'all have no problems eating. You're just like, let's go for dinner, I'm fine. What I like about this exception is it means that people didn't just put bad things across the board. They really thought about each category and said, does this affect me? And appetite was not affected. Desire to be social. Nearly half of people said that they didn't want to be as social. And this is one of the rare ones. This is the one with the most better than. And my guess is it's because after being stressed, people wanted to go hang out with some friends and decompress. And lastly, ability to enjoy things. About a third of people said that they couldn't enjoy things as much. Now this might be the part in the presentation where you see yourself reflected up on this screen. Maybe you're thinking about an incident you've had and realizing, I didn't sleep as well. I couldn't concentrate. Maybe you were 1 in 4 people who actually had worse appetite. This is serious. We have to think about this. This is happening to people who responded that they were facing 3 to 5 to 8 incidences a month. That's going through a lot of crap a lot of time. So what I wanted to do was look at other fields and draw inspirations from them. And actually, if you yesterday got to see Emil's talk on oil refineries, it's something that I think is endlessly interesting too. What can we learn from other people who are in high-stress situations? What can we learn from people who are also doing this, and what lessons can we draw from them? So we're going to look at doctors. We're going to look at stand-up comedians. We're going to look at Olympians. I know, 3 very disparate groups, but lessons I think that we can all apply from them. So doctors. Now, what you all do in SRE is not the same as what doctors do in the sense that they face life and death. And even though some of the situations that happen can feel that way, I want to be very clear that the two don't mirror that way. But in medicine, success often means being perfect. I think that's something that everyone in this room can also understand, though. And one concept that changed my mind about doctors was coping with medical error. Medical practitioners are considered secondary victims. Now, what that means is that when something goes wrong, yes, you've got the main victim who will have a diminished quality of life because of what's happened. But very oftentimes, an error happens not because it's intentional or because it's malicious, but because of systemic reasons. And the actual person who commits that error feels terrible about it, even though it could have been someone else who did that exact same error if they were in that place. And I think there's something valuable here because as SREs then, this is a way to break away from hero culture. A lot of times it can sound like, the way we frame the work that's being done as rushing in and being a hero and solving things and taking no prisoners. But if doctors are out there healing people, saving lives, and they can understand that sometimes when things go wrong, they're secondary victims, I think there's something that we can also take from that in our conversation around how people react after incidences. And just to kind of underline this point, physicians reported increased anxiety about future errors, loss of confidence, sleeping difficulties, reduced job satisfaction, all the same things that we saw in the straw poll results. However, 82% felt that peer support and counseling could help. And there's value in realizing that you're not alone. That's the worst feeling when you're in an incident. And afterwards saying, I did this, I'm alone in feeling this way, why do I feel so bad, everyone else feels fine. What a terrible place to be in. We need to do better to not have that happen. So in my straw poll I asked, are we doing enough peer support? Post-incident, how frequently do coworkers reach out to see how you're doing? And on the left side is never, and on the right side is always. And in case you can't see, it's 0 for always. And that makes sense. It's tough to always reach out to people. But I have to say it was a bit sad to look at the left 2 columns and see how big and bold and bright they were compared to the other ones. That's 45% of people who said that a coworker has never reached out to them after an incident, not even to say, how are you doing, are you okay? Now I asked the other side of it too. How frequently are you reaching out to coworkers? Now here it's a little bit more even, but people are being honest. 1 in 5 people have never reached out to a coworker. And you've got this amazing one person under always who's just running around checking in on everyone. So just bless their heart, they're doing the work. Now I want to switch a little bit into what it's like then to face that incident head on. What can we learn about getting into the right mindset? And that made me think of comics. Comics stand up on stage under bright lights, and they tell jokes to crowds that are maybe not always that sober, usually not that sober, usually not that receptive, and they do this willingly every week, and they enjoy it. That's bonkers to me, but good on them. So I was talking to some friends who are comedians, stand-up comics. I asked them, how do you deal with it? What happens when you inevitably bomb on stage? Because I think there's something that's really valuable about learning what happens when a crowd disappears from you and you know everyone hates you. They're watching you and they hate you. So during the incident, during the stage bombing, they acknowledge something is going wrong. They say there's no point in trying to deny that you're bombing on stage. It's happening. You gotta admit that's happening. Sometimes, all the time to yourself and sometimes even to the crowd. And then you lean into the moment and realize it's a learning opportunity. This is what I love about comics. They're masochists. They're like, I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to sit here and this is terrible, but my perspective will be, I'll learn something from this. I'll get through this. After the incident, they contextualize it at a higher level. So one of my friends says, what's my batting average? He gives himself 1 bad show out of 10. He says if he ever does more than 1 bad show out of 10, he's out of the business. So I think that's pretty good. Maybe we start thinking about that with incidents or just the days that we have going well. If things are going well mostly, let's remember that when we're going through bad days. Figure out how things went wrong and what you'd fix. Now I think that's something that this crowd does really, really well. Understand how to mentally get back to a better place. Now that you know that this thing has happened, are you going to do it again? And know that potentially this crap could happen again. And then get back on that horse. Sorry, I just realized I'm using like language that when I get into like stand-up comedians talking to them, the language just gets saltier. Apologize for that. I want to underline, understand how to mentally get back to a better place. I think that's really valuable, right? To know that incident when it's over, it's not just, we're done, let's move on, but how do we get back to where we were before? That's the whole idea of recovery. How are people coping now? So in my straw poll, the top 5, I know this is a bit hard to read, so I'll share it with you. On the left side, people are spending time on a hobby. They're spending time with people they care about. They're talking with someone about how they're feeling. So about less than a quarter of people do that. A quarter of people try to get some good sleep. And about 1 in 5 exercise. So I'd say that's pretty impressive. People are trying to do the work to get better. Now, I was trying to think, but what if there's some science behind this? How can we do something that we know works and works at a really high level? So we're going to switch from comics now to Olympians. Olympians are incredible. They are on a global stage, seen by billions of people sometimes, and they train for years upon years upon years. They train for so much of their lives for an opportunity that can sometimes be over in minutes, and sometimes to devastating effect. So I wondered, what happens when you failed on a global stage? What happens when you put in all that work and it doesn't go your way? There's actually been some really interesting work that's been done on this. A bunch of researchers have been working with athletes to perform something called self-compassion. That after something goes wrong, you are as compassionate to yourself as you would be to a friend who you just heard had gone through something bad. And there's a reason why they do this. It's because to be at the high level that they're at of performance, they have to be able to regulate their stress and their emotions so that they can deploy the skills that they need to be successful. And that's the thing that kind of made me think, this is something that's relevant to share. If we want to be really, really good at what we do, we also need to understand that we have to be able to fix our stress and our emotions. Athletes were asked to journal expressing understanding, kindness, and concern as they would talking to a friend in the same situation. Now, one concept that really resonated with me and I wanted to share with you is state rumination. I don't know how many of you have heard about this before, but maybe you might recognize the questions that are being put up here. Do you find it hard to stop thinking about the problem afterwards? When thinking about the problem afterwards, did your thoughts tend to dwell on negative aspects of it or how badly you felt about it? Did thinking about the problem tend to make the problem seem worse or make you feel worse about it? Like, this was like staring into my soul. When I saw these questions, I was like, get out of my head. Stop. But they did 3 weeks of journaling. They had a control crowd who just did creative writing exercises, and then they had athletes who did these exercises writing to themselves with self-compassion. And you can see that top line is the control group, and the group that did the exercises had a dramatic drop in state rumination. Over just 3 weeks, they had a huge drop in self-criticism. They had a drop in concern over mistakes, statistically significant for each of these, by the way. And then when asked about their self-compassion, they had much more self-compassion than the people who were just doing the control exercises. The point of all this is that it's intentional, not innate. We might think, hey, Olympians are so good at training, and they go through so many competitive exercises. If something bad happens, I'm sure maybe someone just gives, one of those speeches you see in those Disney sports movies, and they all hug each other after, and they're all better. That's not, unfortunately, how it works in real life. But if you do it intentionally, if you put in the work, you can see really, really great results. So let's ask what incident response for humans looks like. If anything that you got out of this talk, I hope that you realize that you are not alone in the things that you feel. And that this isn't about being tough enough. Because if this affects doctors and stand-up comedians and Olympians, it can affect you. Let's have a talk about how we make things better. Because this is a room full of fixers who are smart enough to be changing the world. And this is something y'all can fix. Thank you.